I'll start off with the city manager, and again, appreciate everybody being here this evening.
Thank you, Your Honor. What we did is ask that we had representatives from the legal department, planning department, and police department. And you can see that the assistant city attorneys here, Suzanne Woodland, along with Dave Holden, director of planning, and the police chief, Michael Magnet. What I'd like to do, if it's okay with you, Your Honor, is to have Suzanne Woodland, the assistant city attorney who's been working on this issue, distribute a memorandum that she has put together along with a matrix showing what zoning ordinances we have relative to performances. And then we'd like to maybe, after she makes her presentation, have Dave Holden talk about the planning issues and follow it up with the police chief talking about the enforcement issues. Okay?
Very good.
Suzanne?
Thank you. Suzanne Woodland, Assistant City Attorney. The city currently does not directly regulate street performers, such as magicians, musicians, dancers, and mimes. Street performers, however, are subject to our noise, our sidewalk obstruction ordinance, our vending and nuisance ordinances in the same manner as all other persons. And what I've done with the memo, you will find a summary of the city's ordinances that impact street performers. Now, the challenge that we face with regard to street performers is that any regulation of street performers raises First Amendment issues. Downtown city sidewalks are public forums where the First Amendment protects freedom of speech, which can include expressive performances. If the city were interested in regulating street performers, it needs to keep in mind that the city may adopt regulations which are reasonable time and place and manner restrictions, provided that the regulation is content neutral and narrowly tailored to serve a significant government interest. And we also have to leave open ample alternative channels of communication. The challenge is that the failure to carefully craft and enforce a regulation can create unnecessary and costly litigation. Boston, Santa Cruz, Chicago, St. Augustine, Florida, Baltimore, Salt Lake City have all made missteps in the area of regulation of street performers. Any regulation of street performers has to be content neutral. I'll go for a moment and just give you a summary of some of the regulation in other communities. In spite of the challenges of regulating in the field of street performers, a number of communities have adopted street performer ordinances, including Newburyport, Massachusetts, which has a pretty short and sweet ordinance, Portland, Maine, Burlington, Vermont, Cambridge, Massachusetts, and many of the other larger cities. I have neither investigated the extent to which the regulations are enforced, nor could I endorse at this point any particular ordinance as a model to follow, but I can tell you that there is a lot out there, some of it good, some of it problematical in terms of regulation and enforcement. Reviewing and amending our existing ordinances may be a preferable option for dealing with any concerns that the council may have with regard to street performers, rather than trying to regulate street performers separately. On the third page of the memorandum that I handed out, I put together a series of questions that I think would be helpful at some juncture for you to consider in this area, because I believe you really need to identify your goal. What do you want in the area of street performers? So what I'll do is I'll just run through the questions that I had in considering this issue, and you can file those away, and at some point, obviously if it becomes appropriate to discuss them, we can do so. So the first question I pose is, does the city want to encourage or discourage street performers? Some types of regulation could discourage street performers. I saw a number of ordinances that required street performers to actually show up, get a license, pay a fee, and you need to consider what your goal is and whether that would help or hinder what you want to achieve. What balance should be struck between the noise created by street performers and local residents who live in the downtown area and the businesses as well who operate down there? Number 3, does the city want to encourage bands or multi-piece performers? And if so, how should that be accommodated or regulated given our existing ordinances regulating such items as tables and chairs in the sidewalk? Should the city specifically identify and try to limit those types of performances that might pose a danger to the public, such as juggling sharp objects? Should preferred performance areas within the city be identified to encourage street performers to perform at those locations as opposed to other areas, keeping in mind, of course, that the public sidewalks would still be available? Perhaps amplification or drums could be permitted at those areas with certain time limits to encourage performers to use those venues. And lastly, is there a way to inform street performers that certain streets or portions of streets within the downtown are not ideal locations for street performing due to narrow sidewalks and heavy pedestrian traffic? So those are some of the questions that I think are important from my perspective to kind of get an answer to.
Your Honor, I think what would be important, we don't have to get definitive tonight, but I think one of the things that should at least be talked about from city council members is probably question 1. I think that really goes to the heart of the whole issue, and I suspect the answer is that we probably want to encourage street performers in a certain way, but that's something really for us to hear from you. We need to understand, before we can move to the next step, to understand what some of your thoughts are on that. And I think it would be helpful to have a little bit of a discussion among the council members relative to that before we move on to the planning department.
I see. Councilor Pinalakos.
Yeah, I'm just curious to why we're here tonight. Have we been having a problem, or what is going on?
It's a good question. Councilor Dwyer.
Do you want me to speak to that?
Sure.
Starting over a year ago, ArtSpeak heard from a number of local artists about confusion in Portsmouth, musicians, local theater people, about wanting clarity in Portsmouth about what is permitted, where is it permitted, what are the regulations, can you ask for money, all these kinds of things. That was long before then there were several incidents this fall where not local street performers, well, I guess one was local, where there were incidences that one, the fire dancer, and second, a juggler, where we, ArtSpeak, as well as I as a counselor, and I know several other counselors, heard from members of the public questions about whether we were encouraging, whether we were discouraging, was Portsmouth an unfriendly place. Also on the other side of it, the number 4 here, what is dangerous to the public, what should be regulated. So I think a number of questions have come up both from local artists, artists from other places who are street performers who come through here, the communities that you see around us that are similar to us in Newburyport, Cambridge, Burlington, obviously mean there's a fair amount of activity in the near area. So it's been raised as a question by a variety of members of the public.
Well, to me, if we're going to allow money given, that's like panhandling on the streets. I think we have to be very careful when we say who should be performers and who shouldn't be performers down there for safety reasons. And the second thing is that the streets of Portsmouth are for people to walk on, not to have to go out in the middle of the street to get by somebody because they're performing. I mean, I think it's a great thing, but I think that we need to control it to somewhat. I just would not feel as though that they should sit down there and have a guitar and sing and expect to get donations, because that makes people feel as though they have to give,
I think that's why, that's an example of why the issue is before us, because that's one of the other kinds of.
I had only heard about the woman dancing with a fire, and I thought that was kind of hazardous, but that's my opinion.
So it sounds like just from that brief give and take, there were a couple of things, at least I heard there. One dealt with, at the very least, where you would do it. Is it going to be, and let's face it, in a city of our era, you've got some streets that are darn narrow. And I don't know that those are necessarily the walkways that are typically where the performers are, but at least compared to a newer city, it would seem like that would be potentially more of an issue. And then another issue, I think, Counselor, that you just mentioned was what kind of props or accompaniments, fire, sharp objects, that is something I've heard as well as a component that may be something that people don't feel that comfortable with. Again, just get from the feedback we've gotten from folks. So and those seem to address a few of the other questions. But getting back to that top question, yeah, Councilor Smith.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Honor. I don't want to discourage street performers by any means, but I would support to get a license or a permit, and with not an outrageous fee, but a nominal number on it attached to it, but for the purposes of then it gives the opportunity for the police department, possibly the fire department, to know what's going on, and we can also then, if we do designate areas for street performing, we can then say, you can do this here. I know there's a stage area on the Vaughan Mall that doesn't get used that much, and we can direct some people to those areas. But it also will then give the police department an opportunity to know what's going on, if there is going to be a crowd situation that's going to be created, if there is someone who wants to come in and dance with fire, then maybe the fire department has to be known about it, so an area cordoned off if we're to allow that to happen. But I think to have a good place for it to start is if they're permitted, then they're at least going to get the rules and regulations and the standards that we'd like to set.
So it sounds like what you're saying is it would be a very low monetary fee attached to it. It's more the process of getting the license. That's what I'm hearing. Okay.
Well, and I think one of the things that Councilor Smith raised is what at least I've seen in a number of the other city ordinances. It's the opportunity then to inform that person. Here's what's permitted in our city, so that you really don't have misunderstandings. It's the clarification.
Yeah, it's just that we have an easy way just to make sure everyone levels it off. But of course, by also having a license and a permit, I don't know, and would have to get and I'm sure that's what the city manager is about to hit me with. What kind of paperwork are we then creating? Is that something that comes out of your office? Is it the police department?
I think it's twofold. I think there's a legal issue that some of these places that do give permits are being tested now. That's number one, through the court system, because the freedom of expression. But number two, yes, to give that permit in a timely fashion. If somebody comes into town at 5 o'clock on a Friday night and wants to be on the sidewalk and play their flute or whatever it is, what do we do if they don't have a permit? And maybe I would refer this to Suzanne, because this is something we've been batting around internally, because I think I like your idea, but it's from a perspective of, will it legally hold water? That's the question.
Yeah, and you have to operate with great care. There are a variety of ordinances out there. Some are still in litigation. Some have been litigated. It becomes then a challenge. Who is a street performer and who is just using a guitar to sing an anti-war song? It's very tough. And I think when you get to the Friday afternoon, someone wants to be there on the weekend, you've got a whole set of administrative issues, which then can turn into legal issues if there is undue delay and we haven't really provided an opportunity. So it is problematical, and it would have to be really carefully examined. And I think you really have to decide, is this going to encourage or discourage? One option is, when you think about this, the public sidewalks are public forums, expression. But if you're looking at, say, encouraging a particular use, say at the Vaughan Mall stage, maybe that is an area where you might want to have someone come in and file an application so that you would be regulating that particular area. Now, they're still free to take the guitar and, walk down the street singing whatever song, political message that they want to get out. On the other hand, there is a venue for perhaps people who have multiple instruments or, whatever you want to do with that space, but you might be able to, instead of thinking of regulating all performances, perhaps, narrow the field. But again, I'd say answer your questions, and then we take a look at the best way to achieve the goal that you want.
Counselor?
Yes, what is the liability for the city on this? I mean, when we allow chairs on the sidewalk, they have to have insurance firm. Who is responsible for this person that comes into the city, and whether they be throwing fire batons or dancing and what they do, if they get hurt or hurt somebody else, who's liable for that?
And I think that's a good question, because then you get to the issue of, and again, what is allowed expression and what is endangering the public. And that's where I'm sure the chief will talk a lot about, because that's where they have a difficult time with, because if it is a gray area for them, it's not from his perspective, it's difficult to enforce a gray area. I mean, perfect example is people playing drums downtown or a bongo and then having somebody doing a protest with pots and pans. Well, I guess that's a perfect example of how do you regulate that. And again, it gets to the free speech. But I think two things need to be done here. I think you have to take some of what both Councilor Smith and Councilor Pantelakis has said. We need to figure out a way to, if there's specialized performances, I guess that's probably the way to describe them, such as juggling and fire dancing and those types of things. Those are specialized and could probably be assigned to certain sites and be permitted. Those that somebody's got a guitar with no amplification and is on the sidewalk singing some kind of protest song or some kind of song in general probably is something you probably won't be able to regulate. You might be able, though, to regulate what Councilor Pantelakis has concern of is the panhandling aspect of it.
Right.
So that's kind of where I see, and what I'm kind of hearing from the council. Am I off on that, or? I mean, we're trying to get some idea of how to move forward here.
Let me hear, I see a couple hands here. Councilor Grosso.
Yes, thank you. I like the idea of the permits. I think particularly for certain designated spots in the city, the Von Mall, perhaps one of them. And then we need to also say, is this permit going to be good for how many times in the course of the summer? Are we going to restrict, do they need to come back every time? Or if you come in and say, I would like one for every Friday and Saturday night for summer months, how is that going to work? I think we should not allow the panhandling, but I think that if we have a couple of certain designated areas, then perhaps at those spots, the liability could be assumed by the city. If there was just for specialized performances. And as far as the others go, as you said, the streets, well, you mentioned were for pedestrians, but actually, unless they're closed off, the streets are for the cars.
Right.
And we need to keep that in mind, too.
I meant the sidewalks.
Yeah. So I think there are a lot of issues here, and it's like a tier. There's degrees to which the performers will be there. If somebody's just there sitting on the sidewalk and playing or singing, there's no harm in that. Maybe that person doesn't need a permit. But to do anything special and to want to gather people around, we need to designate the spots that would be acceptable. And I think we need to get from the police department, before we do put anything to paper, exactly how they can enforce what's.
Probably maybe to go out of order here is maybe to hear from the chief now, because I think he's got a pretty good flavor for what the council has.
Sure, thank you. I have some handouts as well. And I know this is about street entertainers, but I think it's also important to sort of paint the picture of what your average police officer walking downtown in the summertime has to deal with.
Chief, could you bring the microphone closer to you, please? Thank you.
How's that? First of all, he or she has the freedom of speech issues where you have the protests that are going on, sometimes individual protests, sometimes collective protests. You have religious speech. We've dragged the city attorney out of his office on occasion to Market Square. We've had a preacher standing out there on a soapbox yelling at people as they go by. causing us to receive complaints. You have the street vendor issue as well, where you occasionally have a conflict with the vendors over where they're going to set up, or who got there first, and sometimes selling inappropriate items. Puppies seem to be popular for some reason. Then you have the street entertainers as well. And you have the issue surrounding the noise, of course, the obstruction of the sidewalks, the public safety aspect that we're concerned with. For a number of summers now, we've seen the fire axe and also juggling of hatchets and knives as well. Usually they will respond to the officer and pick up and leave or move. In the case that we've talked about recently, I can't go into too much detail on that, but for whatever reason, that individual wanted to pursue their freedom of expression, so to speak. So your officer on the street is kind of left to mediate and determine what the policy is, so to speak, absent any ordinances that he or she can enforce. And I think for the most part, they do a very good job in doing that out there. Right now, the standard for the most part is no amplification, because that's written into one of our city ordinances, no drums or bongos as well. And it becomes difficult for the officer when you have a situation like we had this past winter, where we had a protest and we had about 100 people out there banging on pots and pans. From their perspective, you know, they're going up to a single individual, an entertainer, and they're telling them, look, according to city ordinance, no drums are allowed, and yet they have 100 people out there banging on pots and pans. But also, I think, to try to keep it into perspective, we average about 7 to 12 complaints a summer. That's not that bad. So most of those complaints really surround noise. So, and a lot of it, well, not a lot of it, but quite a bit of it sometimes is the quality of the noise as well. For example, we had an individual who was playing the bagpipes out in front of the church and wasn't doing it very well. And a number of people complained. And then, of course, the drums and occasionally rap music as well. In my experience in talking to the officers, most of these entertainers are doing it to panhandle. I mean, they're doing this. It's called busking, and they're doing this as a way to raise money. We've had an opportunity to take a look at ArtSpeak's recommendations, and we, for the most part, the police department would endorse the different items that they list under the restrictions, which I think talk about having a little bit of space, 40 to 50 feet between the different entertainers, capping it at a certain hour, 10 or 11 o'clock at night, no amplification, and I think no drums was the other one. And then finally, the last part is public safety. No juggling of anything that's flammable, hatchets, knives, that sort of thing. I think that's pretty much it in a nutshell for us.
Probably, Your Honor, if I could move on to Dave, just to get, unless you wanted to open.
Sure.
Why
Why don't we go with Dave, and then, if you don't mind, just holding questions for a few minutes, and then we'll open it back up.
Because in your packet that Suzanne provided you, the last page does have a listing of all the ordinances. Yeah. You may want to go to that, because I know both Suzanne and the Chief have referred to those. But Dave would actually be the one that would be talking about some of the zoning issues. And Dave?
The zoning ordinance is at best complementary to what the police chief is saying, in that it refers that for public events you need to go to the council to get a license or a permit. It also exempts public events that are authorized by city agencies. From there, the zoning ordinance exercises its police powers really by what uses are allowed on a lot. And so it is very poor and really does not address uses in the public right-of-way, but is very good on uses that would be allowed on a public or private lot. In general, I would add that the zoning ordinance does contemplate that you could have live performances in various districts and does provide some regulation on that.
Very good. There were a few questions a moment ago. Councilor Grasso and then Councilor Dwyer.
Yes, I guess my question would be to Suzanne. If we have a no panhandling ordinance, is that enforceable?
That's problematical. I think we've looked at that one, Bob.
Panhandling actually is entitled to some level of First Amendment protection. There are cases on point, and it is problematic.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that we couldn't do it, but if the council wanted to move in that direction, we would have to spend some more time on it to figure out what the parameters are in which you could operate.
Okay, thank you.
Vending is prohibited unless you have approval.
If you don't mind me asking before we move on, just while we're on that subject, in a thumbnail kind of way, what would be an example of the sort of thing? Because when somebody hears panhandling, I think your gut instinct is, well, that should be something that you could regulate. It seems like, but clearly you're saying that there is precedent that says not so fast. What would be a quick example of that difference between one's gut and one's mind? Where's it fall down?
Well, let me answer, I think, this way. I have had a lot of First Amendment cases over the years, dealt with all kinds of First Amendment issues, and I find it to be about the most complicated area of the law there is. And that's because the law and the courts view the First Amendment, frankly, as being the foundation of the Republic. Protecting the ability of people to express themselves really is what's considered by the courts to be what makes this country what it is. Consequently, any restriction, however slight, if it could possibly be extended to some speech of importance, is upheld by the courts. And that's why certainly the founders of the country, the drafters of the Constitution, never thought that their First Amendment was going to protect nude dancing. But it does, because of the thing that I said. So my kind of general advice about First Amendment lawsuits is that cities lose First Amendment lawsuits. And the smart move, therefore, is to try and stay out of them. And that's why we're suggesting that the council proceed with great circumspection here.
So if someone's out there strumming a guitar and just has a basket there, and that would, and people want to donate, that even if he never asked for it or anything, that's okay?
What's okay is content neutral, reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions narrowly tailored to achieve a legitimate governmental purpose. Now, one legitimate governmental purpose is what Councilor Panalakis said. People are supposed to be able to walk on the sidewalk. So you can clearly adopt regulations calculated to preserve the ability of people to walk on the sidewalks, as long as they are content neutral and narrowly tailored, etc.
Noise, presumably, after a certain hour, would qualify as well?
I think that's true.
Yes.
Right, and you'd have to leave a certain amount of space for people to walk by. And
That's the narrowly tailored kind of thing. Exactly.
I see a lot of hands, so I think it was Councilor Dwyer, Councilor Smith, Councilor Panalakos, I believe.
Well, location in a variety of ways seems to be one of the real clear things, both trying to create, as you suggested, some incentives for particular locations. And in looking at what other cities have done, I've noticed that's where most of the attempt to drive people to one place or not to another seems to be, including allowing city councils to designate locations through public hearings that are not appropriate for one reason or another, whether it's obstruction, whether it's noise, as well as some generic things, 50 feet from a business or whatever. So the location seems to be something that a lot of this plays on. But I have a question because the other thing it seems to play on is fairness, having people treated reasonably the same. And Chief, you say that you don't think that permitting is required at this point, and I'm curious about that because it seems to me that one of the easiest things to do to ensure that there is fairness and knowledge is to permit. Because otherwise, I don't know how you do that. Otherwise, it may seem on the part of the person exercising their freedom of speech that it's random enforcement. So what's your thinking about why not to permit?
My feeling was that the level of complaints
Is low.
So I'm not sure that we need to put a mechanism in place to force everybody to come in and get a permit. But that's certainly a policy decision that the council can make. My advice, I guess, would be to perhaps look at tightening up one or two of the existing ordinances so that we can deal with the noise issue and the public safety issue. And I think that will go a long way to dealing with the fairness issue. If there's no drums, no amplification, they have to end at 10 o'clock at night, no juggling of fire, axes, knives. I think that'll deal with a lot of the equitable issues that you bring up. But again, if you want to have a permit, certainly that's up to the council.
Okay, I think we're going Councilor Smith, Panalakos, and then Councilor Hines.
Thank you, Your Honor. It seems to me that there's two types of performances, if you want to call it that, that are out there. Ones that are receiving money and ones that seem to be doing more protest. They have a message that they want to get out. And maybe that should be, if the legal department seems to have, the one that is more the protest, someone trying to get a message out is more the problematic one. But if if that is not permit, you don't need a permit for that. But if anyone else, if they're out there strumming their guitar trying to, raise a couple of bucks, that's what we say, okay, you got to come in, you have to get a permit. These are the rules, these are the regulations. You want to do juggling? Fine, you can juggle, the sticks. No hatchets, no knives, but you got to have a permit, and that way we know we can get the rules out there. But as for the ones that are, if they're just banging pots and pans and, it's starting to get late at night, and as long as they're not blocking the streets, blocking the people's way, I guess then you can put a time element on those. But, I see just not having drums, because you can get whistles in, hey, pots and pans banging or sometimes can be just as much of a nuisance as banging on a drum. But I still think that having some sort of a permitting process with us, and I don't want it to be a dollar amount that's going to try to discourage it, but that way we know that they got the rules, they got the regulations, they got the standards, and these are the places that they can have them. Now, with that being said, I'm also concerned about where to have them. It seems to be that we have that wider area in front of North Church, and do we really have complete say over that entire area of North Church? Where when people start setting up in front of the church, if that's church property,
Yes.
We can't regulate it. Do they have to get permits from the church? Does the church complain? Do they not let it? Where's that whole thing tie in? And finally, I just want to say I want to also continue the encouragement of the policy that we had last year of the blocking off of from Porter Street to Market Square on Friday, I think it was Friday and Saturday evenings, to allow performances to come in, because that seemed to be something that people were looking forward to. It seemed to work very well, and that was set by time, and I don't know if there was any police problems that arose from that. From the performances that I saw out there, I enjoyed them and never saw issues.
Your Honor, just to talk about what Councilor Smith has mentioned on the church, whenever we have a major event with Portsmouth or others, we always make it a point to contact the church and have them involved in our planning sessions. It basically is something that is I believe they own a certain portion of that sidewalk, don't they, Bob? And so we're always very careful to make sure that they're okay with it. The church and the members of the church have been extremely generous to the city. They allow that area to be used. They allow their facility to be used. And so we try to be very careful not to overstay our welcome on their property, but also to try to be very careful and let them know so that if they have a funeral or a wedding, that we, don't interfere with that. And so they've been extremely cooperative, and I think we've got a pretty good relationship with them on that. So with regards to permitting there, I don't know if we could actually set up an area there. But my suggestion might be to follow up on what you're saying is work with Pro Portsmouth this summer again, utilize the Porter to Market Square, and try to encourage that area for specialized acts, and Vaughan Mall, and really try to move the permit in that direction where if somebody knows they could come in to Market Square and utilize that on Friday and Saturday night, we would want to know what's going in there because we don't want to have a conflicting type of performances going on, but that would give them more space. We'd be able to deal with those issues in advance, and it would, I think, accomplish what everybody's saying here, and then allow the person that's going to maybe do the card tricks on the sidewalk or whatever continue, because I think the chief is right. I don't think we've had a major issue with that. So that might be an area that we may want to focus on, take into account what the chief has said, tighten up a couple of our ordinances, and then have the staff work with Pro Portsmouth on doing the Friday and Saturday nights, which the city council authorizes by virtue of a vote that comes before the city council. Last year you did that. You authorized that that area be closed, and there was a whole list of dates and times, and there's a beginning and an end, and I believe it worked pretty well last summer, and we continue that. And if it does continue to work, we might want to fix up that area a little bit more in the center area to create a new type of streetscape there that might be more aesthetically pleasing, such as maybe not brick, but some kind of stamped asphalt that might allow for, between Porter and Market. And once you close it off with these bollards, maybe you would have that area maybe on a permanent basis, so that when you do use it, it has a defined space.
Follow up, if I may, Your Honor?
Sure.
With that being said, on the church property, if somebody sets up and starts banging bongo drums, do we have say on it since it's church private property?
It may be more complicated than that, because some of the area in front of the North Church, paved by the city, maintained by the city, and even though the underlying title to the land might be held by the church, that's to some degree a public sidewalk on their land. So we may have some authority over some of it, not over the others.
But I'm not suggesting that. I think that on a regular basis, utilize what is considered the street area, and then you could have different types of performances in that area that would be a little bit more than just the person with the guitar or the person doing the card trick, that type of thing.
All right, Councilor Penelakos.
Yes. Bob, to get back to the First Amendment issue on panhandling, does the city have a right to say, if you want to come in here and make money off of us, then you pay us a fee of $200 a year? We make the vendors do that.
It's basically treat them like a vendor is what you're saying.
That's right.
I suspect the answer to that question is no. We didn't do that research. We didn't think that was the direction we were heading in tonight. But obviously we can find out about it. But I just know intuitively from different things I've read, and I kind of recall reading in other contexts, that there is some freedom of expression interest involved in panhandling and in sleeping in the library. I mean, this gets back to the mayor's point of, what's your intuition on these things? And what I'm trying to say is that the First Amendment protections actually go far beyond anybody's normal intuition. You just wouldn't think it went there, but it does.
Yeah, why I'm saying that is because we charge every restaurant, every vendor downtown, just about any business that's downtown has to buy some type of license in order to exist in the city and in the state. So it doesn't seem fair that someone can come in and stand on the sidewalk and sing and collect money and not pay taxes on it, number one, or not have to account to the city for it.
I gotta say, it does seem you could in theory be 25 feet from a vendor, a hot dog vendor, who has gone through all the hoops necessary to do what he or she does, and producing a service that is food, and then somebody 25 feet away could be producing a service, music, maybe good. If it's not a very good bagpipe player, maybe not so good. But nonetheless, a service as well, maybe make a few bucks off of it and have no hoops. That I guess that's where the intuition to me doesn't seem equitable.
Yeah, I can just reaffirm sort of Bob's instinct on this. Just in looking at some of the case law related to street performers, you will find very few ordinances which don't allow the passing of the hat. And I think there's good reason for that, and I did skim a few of the cases, and I think it is quite problematical. I will also say that, I mean, I haven't researched, but it's my understanding that generally you don't make much money when you're out there with your guitar or your flute or your violin or whatever instrument you have. So I don't think, there may be that occasional star performer, but by and large, I don't think the general run-of-the-mill street performer is collecting a lot of money. They do it because they love it and it's a little extra change, but that's just my impression.
A follow-up?
Sure.
In talking about street performers, do we have any regulations on what your freedom of speech is? If you want to run down the street in your underwear, is that freedom of speech and someone could do it? Or is there regulations that cover that, such as families might not like the idea of belly dancers being on the streets or something like that? Is there any regulations to those things, or just?
I know you're looking at me, but
No.
it may be a better question for the city or
City
assistant.
attorney.
I know Hampton Beach really wrestled with that whole issue of inappropriate T-shirts in public view being sold. So, Sully, wade right into the swamp here. Come on.
Content neutral,
Yep.
reasonable time, place, and manner regulations.
But
That's what you
public
can do.
decency,
Serial number.
Right.
public decency, right?
Well,
Yeah.
no, probably
Who's
not. Probably not, because one person's indecency is another person's expression.
Dave Holden's not going to make much money running down.
Neither am I. Dave.
Yes, he will, because we're all going to give him money to go get some clothes.
We have waded out of one pool and into another pool, and I don't know what pool that is. Councilor Hines, you've been
going to be.
Councilor Hines, you've been exceedingly patient despite the direction of the last 30 seconds. So please, Councilor Hines.
My position on this whole issue is that licensing freedom of speech or freedom of expression will never work unless we got more lawyers to defend ourselves. The second part of it is freedom of expression, freedom of speech are controlled by the police department and by licensing when necessary by the code of common decency. When it offends more people than it entertains, I think there's a way to handle that, and I don't expect that that would ever become a problem. As far as the entertainment, a lot of that would have to be controlled by the amount of noise created if it exceeds the noise limits that the city does have. So there are controls the police department has to work with. Licensing, I'm not in favor of for any of these issues. I think that this city, like a lot of other cities, is very attractive because it gives everybody a feeling of freedom. You can come here, you can enjoy a lot of things that you don't get to enjoy in other cities, sometimes because there are not those same things in other cities, sometimes because the opportunity is not there. It's a different culture. A lot of people that come here come from other cities that miss the opportunity to enjoy Portsmouth because of what happens here. So licensing could only be an obstruction. Freedom of speech, freedom of expression, can operate within the code of decency. And when it doesn't, then the police department is there. And that's what I have to say.
Thank you, Counselor. I want to begin to wrap this up to provide some direction. I know, Counselor Dwyer, you've had your hand up for a while, and perhaps we can...
Well, that's what I was going to start to say, that it seems like the common ground here is incentivizing to the extent that we can. And I think we just have maybe a little difference of opinion over what constitutes an incentive. I mean, I think it seems like the idea of time and place incentives in the first piece that Suzanne gave us, point number 5, suggested an incentive that I know would be very well received by a number of local performers, and that is amplification or drums permitted in some locations, and that would be a way to incentivize for a lot of local people what the issue is. I think if we don't go the permit route, the key then is whether the police feel that they would have enough guidance to be able to walk the line among all these things that we talked about. And I noticed, again, on the chief's, his last point is Portsmouth growing use of the word notoriety as a street entertainment venue. So the incentivizing seems to be some things that we can move in the direction toward, but I still wonder about the clarity of where folks get enough clarity that there's fairness on both sides. Fairness in terms of if I were a street performer, what do I know my limits are? And if I were a police officer, what do I know to look for in terms of those limits? And maybe that's a matter of identifying, as you said, in some of the current ordinances, some suggested changes, but I'm not sure where those changes are in the ordinances that would be enough.
And the point I've just tried to make earlier is that absent that clarity, then the police officer on the beat has to just make that decision and establish that policy on the street. So if the council wants...
By default.
By default, exactly.
This reminds me a little bit, Suzanne and Councilor Panalakis, among others, on the dog committee last year. One of the elements, and Chief, correct me, and other members here from the police department, it seemed like one of the concerns was a lack of definition that, for lack, no pun intended, took away any teeth in the provisions that existed at the time. And so you had to rely, in that example, if I recall correctly, basically, if somebody said, yeah, my dog is under voice control, which is kind of tough to prove or disprove unless you're there at that moment, it doesn't work, what are you going to do? And it made it very difficult to enforce. And as I look at some of the ordinances, and again, I think one point the chief made that's excellent that maybe cannot be repeated enough is we're dealing with, at least in terms of formal calls for service, formal complaints, a minute number, really, in the big picture. 7 one year, 12 another year, and you don't want to be a hammer looking for a nail, But as I look at the noise ordinance, which it seems to me, at least from the feedback I've gotten, if there is one element, because we've heard different elements this evening, panhandling, noise, existence, are there too many? The location, obstruction, the danger, the chainsaw in the air, fire in the air kind of thing. These are all different components, but the one overwhelmingly that I've heard the most deals with noise. And we have a noise ordinance, but, parentheses, difficult to enforce, general prohibition on any unusually loud noise that disturbs the peace of others. That's got to be tough at times to do something with.
It can be.
And if to the extent, and this is where folks that, I'll speak for myself, have far more expertise on this than me and maybe most of us, to say how could the tools in your toolbox be sharpened to allow you to do what you think needs to be done. If that takes care of a lot of this, in addition to maybe, I think as Councilor Dwyer and others have said, an area and the city manager where, whether it's permitting or not, where a lot of the performance can be done, Vaughn in front of the church, it seems like that combination, without creating a whole new set of rules and bureaucracy, may take care of a lot of what's doesn't seem to be that huge a problem. Just and trying to get it into a direction of what would be a next step then. Is it looking at sharpening ordinances? Is it looking to specify areas? There are a couple different directions I've heard, but looking for some direction to give the folks in a position to do something with that.
Maybe, Your Honor, well, I'll defer to.
Okay, Councilor Penelakis?
Yeah, I'd like to see us tighten the ordinance so that the police can work with them, and we did that with the dog issue. I am not for changing the ordinance to say they can have amplified music, because no matter where you go downtown, there is people that lives there someplace in some of those buildings or businesses or whatnot. And sometimes when you're downtown walking on the streets, you hear music from some of those places that have the outdoor patios and whatnot, and it is disturbing if you're walking around, you're trying to talk, and they're kind of outdoing you if you happen to be someplace. But I would not go for any amplified music, because I think that tends to give too broad a base and ends up with too many problems, and it would end up with too many complaints in it. But I would like to see us tighten the ordinance so it makes it so that they can enforce it without any question about it.
Councilor Grosso?
I was just going to bring in another aspect of this, is that while people are downtown and walking around, I would caution that all animals, the dogs, be on leashes, and if they're going to be brought down there, because it's no place to, let them go without one.
And
For
certainly, I believe
everyone's
that's
safety.
the aforementioned law ordinance change, I believe, takes care of that. And
That's
It
correct.
does.
Yep. I saw a couple other hands. Councilor Smith. And
Thank
then
you, Your
Councilor
Honor.
Reynolds.
Just, I too, I'd like to see the ordinance itself tightened up, see if we can't give it a little more teeth to help out the police department. And I also would like to see if we can work on location and continue, as I said before, work on with what Pro Portsmouth was. But the one aspect I think we're still missing is how do you let the performers know what are the rules and regulations? And that's the reason I was suggesting to do a permit, with, and again, I don't want it to discourage anybody even if it's a $5 or $3 fee, just so that they know something was signed, this is the information, this is what the standards are, so that everybody's on the same playing field. I just think that I want to make sure we get that aspect of it as well. I, again, don't want to discourage anybody's First Amendment rights, but at the same time, it's only fair that they know what the rules that we and the standards that we have.
Just real quick, while we're on that, as looking for consensus here and direction, quick, in terms of any legal questions associated with something like that, off the top?
Well, I guess I like the idea of having some control when you go and have a specific site that's over and above what would typically be allowed on the sidewalk. What I think might be something we could do is I'd like to talk to Pro Portsmouth about it a little bit and try to, see if we can partner a little. Maybe we can talk, and I don't want to talk for Barbara, but we do have the Vaughan Mall, and we do have the area from Porter to Market Square that we can look at. And taking a little bit of what Councilor Smith has said, maybe try to work with Pro Portsmouth on those areas as venues for people to do performances. I know Councilor Pantelakis has concern about amplification, so do I. But it might be useful to say, you could have certain levels of amplification. Let's say you have an acoustic guitar. You physically need to have some kind of amplification for if they're going to sing. Or somebody's going to be doing some kind of performance of some sort, and that you focus it right at Market Square in that area Fridays and Saturdays with very defined times, and so that instead of creating some kind of elaborate system here at City Hall, we work with Pro Portsmouth, who's been extremely successful in working with people, and we try to use Vaughan Mall, and we try to use the Market Square area, and if we're successful in those two areas, maybe we can find one other area and try to work in that regard. And what we basically would do is tighten up the ordinance, as the chief has suggested, and then work with the city council and Pro Portsmouth to try to come to some kind of partnership, if you will. That would be just some thoughts that I would have on that.
Let me go Councilor Reynolds, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I apologize to everyone for coming in pretty late. There was another event tonight that I had promised to be at, but this is an issue that I've been following and communicating some with Councilor Dwyer behind the scenes. And I did miss a lot of the presentation, so I can't really comment directly on things that were said, but I guess I just want to, as far as we're trying to get a sense of how different councilors feel in different direction, my feeling is that in general, public street performances, of course it's been pointed out that they are protected speech and protected freedom of expression, and that we should, and again, I did do a little research on my own, looked up under an organization called Community Arts Advocates, just looked at some of the experience of other places, some of the court cases that have been brought. The city of Boston apparently is embroiled in a long time court case, you know, that as far as I can tell, it doesn't seem like it's quite settled yet. While it's kind of funny that right across the river, and the city of Cambridge has enacted an ordinance that seems to work pretty well for them. Back in December, this council, I believe it was in December, either first or second meeting, last meeting of the year, we passed an ordinance that was lauding our support for the Bill of Rights. And, you know, everybody's in favor of the, I mean, of course, that's not controversial at all. We're all good Americans, and we read and proudly proclaimed our support for the Bill of Rights. And it's easy to do that, of course, when it's in the abstract. Everybody's for freedom and democracy in the abstract until something starts to happen, or people start to say things or do things that they may object to in some way. This is an important issue, I think, that sort of defines, you know, really what kind of community we are. I mean, do we say we're in favor of freedom, but, you know, we don't want people to sing music we don't like, or make speeches we don't want to hear, or I think that we should be erring, if anything, on the side of freedom and allowing people to do things. We have ordinances, and that's, from what I can see, the you know, the history of these cases in the courts show that, of course, as Attorney Sullivan has pointed out, governments can regulate expressions of speech, but in ways that are narrowly tailored to protect the particular interest at hand, which is safety, you know, and other things. And we can't enact broad prohibitions on things sort of under the guise of public safety or public nuisance or other things. So I think we should be being very careful, leaning in the direction of allowing things. You know, an important point is that the right of people to speak freely is also the right of other people to hear people's speech, and the right of people to be exposed to public performances. It's something that I think adds to the flavor of a community. So that's my general leanings, and I look forward. I think John's suggestion for working with Pro Portsmouth is a good one, and hopefully we can work out something where we, you know, as we go up to Concord in a couple weeks to accept our award for being a leading community in the state that promotes the arts, that we can set the flavor here in Portsmouth that street performers are welcomed and encouraged, you know, within the narrowly defined or subject to the strictly defined public interests.
Let me go with Councilor Grosso, and then I want to finish up, I think.
Thank you. I would, going along with what Ken has said about coming up with rules and regulations, whatever they may be, when we get that down in black and white, I'd like to see us give that to Arts Speak and have them keep it as part of their communication, so that I know maybe performers might turn to them not knowing where to go, and they would be able to pass that information on. And I don't know if it belongs on the web or on the internet or whatever, but I think that it would be good to have that whenever it's compiled.
Certainly, that gets to whatever the end result is, aiding in the dissemination of information. And again, that's where the internet can be one of many places to help disseminate that. Want to summarize and start off by showing appreciation to everybody for taking time to discuss this. And I'd like to think that we're in a better place an hour now than we were an hour ago. I'm getting the sense that there are two basic pieces that we're asking to move forward with. One is, I know they start off vague, but it gives some direction, is the general tightening of ordinances which may better put our law enforcement officials in a position of avoiding some of that gray zone, which makes your job probably a lot tougher than it needs to be in some cases. So certainly, I would think that going forward, we're seeking your guidance in the appropriate way to do that, and want to work with you on that. So that's one. The second seems to be working in the general context of defining areas where there'd be performance, perhaps permitting would be involved, but I think the general theme is working with Portsmouth in defining what those areas might be, what some of the guidelines might be. Would it be something that would be permitted or not? Again, at this point, still in a general phase, but at least it gives us direction, and perhaps at some point, not at a date certain this evening, with the work of the city manager's office and Portsmouth, and then eventually when something is figured out, disseminated by folks like ArtSpeak and others, we'll have something going forward. Again, the thing I would stress is the old hammer looking for a nail is, I think the chief's right on. It's a relatively small in terms of calls for service. Doesn't mean that it's not significant to discuss. That's why we're here. But it means that we probably, without flipping the whole cart over, there are ways to make the improvements that everybody here is looking to make. So unless there's anything hot and heavy, maybe that's the way to close that. And I know that we wanted to have a brief discussion that has virtually nothing to do with that one. Emphasis on brief and nothing to do with. So I don't know if those that are here for this first part probably don't need to be around the table necessarily for the second piece, which deals more with budget figures.
Mr. Mayor, will we have something in place that they can enforce this summer, or to give them
question.
a little?
That is, Counselor, we will be looking, I'll be talking with the legal staff tomorrow, and we'll deal with tightening up the ordinances, and that will try to bring back probably if we can put it together, maybe the last meeting in April or the first meeting in May. So it just depends. We have a lot of ordinances coming through at this particular point, but we certainly will, and I will, and I know that Barbara's here, and I'll talk to Barbara tomorrow and see. I think I hope that they're still interested in participating with us, but I will talk to her as well. So that's kind of the direction that I think I've received, and we'll proceed under that.
And a thank you to Suzanne and to Bob
Yes.
for doing
Thank
this.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
So, Laura, we got a date to run. Please let me
We
know
can
that
raise
date.
money on that, I'll tell you.
That's right.
Thank you, camera.
I want to be out of
Wear your
town.
clothes. Everybody wear your clothes. Very good. I don't think that we necessarily need to take a break. I don't think the
This is
second
gonna be
piece will
2
take.
minutes,
Yeah, this is going to take very little time, and then we all can go home. But perhaps the city manager can describe what is being distributed. Sure. So one pager, right?
Yes. Your Honor, as you are aware, I'm in the process of putting together the budget for fiscal year '07. And one of the things that I wanted to bring to your attention was what I would consider some information, so that when you receive the actual detailed document on April 20th, you'll have some understanding as to the complexities of the process that we're going to be going through. What you have before you tonight is a one-page summary of the total gross budget. And if you look at the box area, you'll see fiscal year 2006, and the gross budget for fiscal year 2006 was $73 million. And the department requests as they stand right now is $77,997,000, or approximately $4.9 million increase over last year, or about 6.7%. One thing I'd like to just mention here is, of that $4.9 million, about $1.7 million of that increase is for health insurance and energy costs. If you took health insurance and energy out, you'd probably be looking at about a 4.4% increase for all departments. You'll notice I didn't focus on any particular department. This is both operating and non-operating, debt service and those types of things. But what I wanted to focus on would be the budgeted property tax levy. And and I'd like to talk a little bit about what the impact of the department requests would be on the tax rate. Now, if you look down below, you'll see that all the way over to your right, you can see in yellow, department requests as of April 20th, 2006, which I'll be submitting to you with details, would require a tax rate of $1.41 or an 8% increase over the previous year in taxes. Now, you notice that the property tax levy is going up 9.23%. And the reason it's going up higher than the actual tax rate is because of the $50 million in new growth that I talked about. And that's about $900,000 in new revenue that we are receiving that's spread out. So what you have is if department budgets hypothetically were approved by the City Council as submitted, you would have approximately 8% increase in the tax rate, or about $1.41. Now, what I provided you so that when you start deliberating on the budget is a whole scenario of different tax rates. So, for example, if you felt as a council that the tax rate should be approximately 4%, you can look at the column that has the 5% property tax levy with a 3.86% tax increase, and you would see that you'd have to reduce the budget by about $2.3 million. And that's a combination of reducing the budget or adding revenues from other sources other than property taxes. So the 3.86% is approximately the consumer price index. The January to 05 to January 06 consumer price index has been about 4.25%. As you're aware, our November to November was 3.26%, which was an aberration, but a good one for us. You can see that if you wanted to achieve that, if you wanted to achieve more than that and reduce the tax rate lower, you can see that as well, a 2.9% tax increase. And then if you wanted to go slightly higher, a 4.9% tax increase. So I did that for you. You can see what the reductions would be required. And the reason I'm doing this is because I wanted you to be aware of the difficulties and the challenges that we're going to have this year. And like I said, about 2% of the entire budget's increase is because of energy and healthcare costs. And I'm not making, the reality of life is we've got to deal with that. We can't just make an excuse for that. We need to deal with it. But I wanted you to be aware because you need to benchmark, because department budgets may not be overstepping their present service level. Mm-hmm. They may be at their present service level. I know in the municipal side, we're right at the service level. And if you wanted to go lower on the municipal side, we would have to look at a program, which is fine. I don't have any problem with that. But I think you need to understand that because what's pushing the budget substantially this year is health insurance and energy. And that could be, you could go to any town USA and probably run into the same situation. You've seen headlines already in the newspaper for other towns. But this will give you at least a template to look at. Take it for what it is. But you will be getting on April 20th your budget. You'll have all the details in it. But I thought it'd be useful for you to have this.
One thing I'd want to add is to echo what the city manager just said. In April 20th, correct? April 20th, we see the budget, the proposed budget for all departments. But really, between now and then, this is one element of thinking. And this is something that when those other communities are struggling, as we will, to make tough decisions, I think one thing that we can do to be a step ahead of many communities in that process is to ask now, I'm not saying tonight, but now, over the next several weeks, how much money can we afford to spend over last year? In other words, how much of a tax increase can you ask Joe, $300,000 homeowner, to pay over last year? You see the bottom line in the chart says that at the different percent increases, not just the percent change in terms of your percent additional taxes over last year in your bill, but how many dollars does that actually equal, assuming your property value were to stay the same? And that's really an important question to ask, because at the end of the day, people aren't paying tax rates, they're not paying property values, they're paying taxes. So I think we need to understand it in the same language that the people at home that will be paying these taxes will clearly understand it when they pay their bill. So really, that's what I think the point of this is to be able to answer the question as a group, because it helps set expectations for departments and for citizens. How much more than last year can we afford to spend? And once you answer that question, then you say, what is the best way to spend the amount that we've determined we can afford? And so that's the logic, without getting into specific departments, anything near those lines tonight. I think that's the general mindset, and this is what that information is supposed to be a step on the road towards.
And just to then be able to fully interpret it, give me the rule of thumb on approximately how much the value is going to increase of properties. You know, so if I'm looking at this from an individual point of view and saying, well, what does this mean for me with the revaluation?
Well, I think that's something you have to stay away from, because you're really dealing with apples and oranges on that. Because what we hope to happen and what we believe will happen is, because we've been keeping everything proportional,
Right.
what's going to happen is the person that owns a $300,000 house probably will rise at the same rate as other properties in the city, such as commercial and industrial, so that because we've been keeping it proportional, that $350,000 house hypothetically might still be paying, for FY06, that $5,300.
Okay.
You follow what I'm saying? That's why
Even though there's the increase.
even though there's the increase, we have really strived to try to keep those things proportional, so that what happened in the past, you would find that over time, you would have commercial, industrial, new properties coming on, and they'd be valued here a little bit higher. And at 10 years, you would have this situation where you'd have commercial, industrial up here, and you would have the residential down here. And so when you did that once every 10 years, you would bring them up, but you couldn't bring commercial. So you'd have that shift over to the residential. We don't expect that to happen this year. What we do expect is that there will be, if you did an addition to your house, obviously that's going to increase the value of the house. But if there's a section of the city and your value is $300,000, you can expect, if that goes up, that it's probably going to be not a huge shift that's going to occur. And I think the question that hopefully I answered that, you're not going to see that shift. And that's why we've done that on an annual basis.
And that's also why it's really important for folks listening at home to not focus exclusively on your home's property value or exclusively on the tax rate, because they're inverse. In theory, as long as John said, the values go up at roughly the same rate, is if your property value goes up, your tax rate will go down. At the end of the day, your tax bill is a result of spending. It is not a result of a rate or even a property value. It is a result of how much the city spends. And that's why the first step is determining how much more we can spend than last year. And then the difficult but necessary work of April 20th to the day the budget is passed is, what is the best way to spend the amount of money that we determine we can afford to spend?
And just getting back to Councilor Dwyer's question, one of the things that is important to realize, we do have $50 million of new value,
right,
which didn't pay taxes in the past, which then allows us to create $900,000 of new revenue.
John, that bottom line, like on the 4%, that increase in 6 months would be half of that amount?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it would. You're correct.
Yeah, be half, but not the full.
Right.
So that's and again, certainly not suggesting now, as I think we've ready to close up, that we opine on which percentage number, whether it's anything from 4 to 6 to 8 to, it's not the intent. But this is the information. I think it's an important discussion to have at some point in the not too distant future with each other, with yourself. I think maybe with yourself may be as important as any discussion.
One thing I would say, Your Honor, is that there are areas of the budget that typically as a manager under the charter, I have the ability to reduce. But one thing I will tell you is there are a couple major areas of the budget, such as education and probably police and fire, that I'm going to allow to go through as presented to me. And the reason I'm going to do that this year is because there's such a significant decisions that need to be made here that I don't believe as one person I should be the one that should be making those decisions. I will work it through with you. I will get you the information you need, and as we go through the work sessions, I will work to guide the city council where I think we should be going to protect the services of the city and least impact the residents. But when it comes to the education side of the budget, which is the most significant side, I firmly believe that's a policy issue, and that I will pass that along to you as proposed by the school board. But I will stand ready with the staff to go through as many scenarios as you want, to work with you. But I think, as the mayor has indicated, you've got to benchmark where you want to be. Because once you tell me that, then I can go back and work with departments. And you know, they're ready to work with you. I mean, I looked at the last 8 years. I did an analysis of the last 8 years of budgets. And to be honest with you, we did pretty good in terms of keeping the spending down, considering the whole issue of the statewide property tax. So,
which could be back.
Which could be back. But what I'm saying, what my point is, that I think the departments will stand ready to work with you. We just need to do it in a way that is working together. But I want you to be aware that more than likely that's the number you're going to see. But it will be in a detailed format. And I just wanted to let you know why I let a couple of the budgets go through the way they are, because I believe if you're going to reduce them, there really are service issues that you got to deal with, program issues, and that's what you're going to have to deal with.
Councilor.
Yeah, the health insurance and the energy cost are really fixed costs that cannot be brought down, right?
Well, the only way that you can, I'm going to probably avoid the word fixed costs, because I think.
Oh, okay.
But what I would say to that is they can be brought down.
I call it a fixed cost in my house.
They are, but what you would do is you would then, in order to reduce those fixed costs, you would then reduce service, you'd eliminate a program or a service. And that way, because the budget's 83% labor intensive, that might mean people are not filling positions. That way, when you reduce a position, and I've already done the numbers I'll provide you during the budget process, there's a certain average that we use for a municipal employee, a certain average we use for a police officer, a certain average we use for a teacher, a certain average we use for a firefighter. So you would include not only their wages, but their medical insurance, their FICA, their retirement, and then you'd say, okay, that's hypothetically worth $75,000 on the average. Then you'd have to back out unemployment if that was the case, and the maximum on that is like $9,800. So you'd come up with an average number that you would come up with. So they're not fixed costs. The only way they're fixed is if you want to keep the same level of service as you had last year.
Perhaps a better term, just to throw something out there, might be status quo cost.
Right. Is a municipal association doing anything to help the cities and towns with the cost of health insurance, trying to find a better way to do it? I mean, I think that we pay them. I think that's something they should be involved in finding a solution, because everybody is in this position. Every city and town in this state is in that position.
And every business is too.
And every business.
And so the local government center is doing a lot of things. We are looking at a lot of areas to try to, and believe it or not, wellness areas are important, and that's a big push by the local government centers. We've got to look at wellness programs for our employees, and that's what we're pushing real hard. The other thing, and this will take place, and this is something the city council is going to have to talk about over the next year and work with our city negotiator. We're going to have to talk and partner with our unions to talk about health care, because they are paying high premium shares, substantial sums of money. So maybe we can partner and find a better way to do that, and that's something I think we can focus on over the next 18 to 24 months.
I think you didn't mean this. I just want to clarify that when you talk about service reductions, it's service reductions from the requests. as opposed to necessarily service reductions. from
Right. I can only
status
speak
quo.
for the municipal
Right,
side. So,
I
for example,
understand.
when the municipal budget, when on the municipal side, and I can't speak for the other departments right now, but that will come in at what the mayor referred to as a status quo budget. If I go below what I'm coming in with, because I'll be coming in probably in the fives, that would mean that I'd have to do something about that. But if you're talking about the schools, that's something you have to ask them that question. I think you're probably correct in saying that they've asked for additional programs.
Right.
In the municipal budget, there's no new programs, it's status quo, and anything that you would go below would have to come into a service. You are correct, though.
Any other, I see lots of thinking.
Well,
But I think
why don't we leave it at that?
which is a good place to stop. That's a good place to stop.
I just wanted to say that I really appreciate John doing the work and Mr. Mayor for having city manager prepare this for us. I think it is very valuable, very important that we be given, that not just we, but the whole community be sort of given this sort of framework lens, if you will, to look at the budget process through. It's really great laid out here. How much are we prepared to ask taxpayers to ante up? So I think it's important that sooner rather than later people start thinking this way. And just going to the city manager's remarks, I think he's right on in the approach. Clearly, the three budgets other than the municipal department are presented to us by boards that consist of elected representatives. And I've said it in the past, and I'll say it again. I think that those elected representatives ought to be every bit as responsible to taxpayers as the city council is. We all have a role in delivering the services that people want, but it has to be at a price that they can afford. So,
And I think one thing I look forward to with all the boards, and working with John in terms of the municipal side, is I think that you'll find, and it's a process, but that you'll find that if we deliberate and determine as a group what's the amount of money that we're prepared to ask for last year, once you have an idea as a group, consensus on that number, I'm not saying it's easy, it's not, but I think the discussion becomes more productive. It becomes less about, do you care about X or do you care about Y? It says, well, we likely can't have everything that all departments would like. That's true in almost every municipality, from the original to where you end up. In most cases, some departments are, perhaps tighter than others. But you're beginning with a discussion that says, here's how much money we're going to have to work with. Now let's come up with the best way to spend this money and make choices. And just because they're choices, that's what we're elected to do, is to make choices. And to work closely with other folks that are elected to make choices as well. So I think it can be a productive and a positive process. But I think if you start with that commonality of how much money can we spend, that greatly increases the chances that you have a positive process. So that's part of it too, is you want it to be a positive, respectful process, because all the other folks are getting elected too, so their opinion matters just as much.
One other item off this subject, Your Honor, is that the chair of the legislative delegation contacted me and wanted to know when the city council could meet with them. Typically, we do that in the morning. I try to avoid their legislative. I'd probably defer to Councilor Pantelakis, who would know better. But I was suggesting maybe some Monday or Friday. Let me know what is best for you. I don't know, Laura. What do you think?
I think a Monday or Friday. Fridays are out for me, but they will be going into their hearings over Senate bills. Starting this week.
Do you want me to, I know that Fridays are tough for you, but I'd like to try to either aim for maybe this Friday or Friday maybe April 15th.
I can't do Fridays at all.
Okay.
Yeah. But that's no sign you can't have a meeting with the delegation.
Yeah.
I just can't be there on Friday.
What about doing it on the same day as we have a council meeting when we know where?
Well, that means you're starting, I have no problem with that, but you're starting at about 7:30 in the morning. You probably see each other again till about 11 o'clock at night. And I'm certainly in game for that, but
What
I don't
about
know
the
if you are.
10th? There's no council.
As long as you don't feed us Wendy's hamburgers and chicken.
That's right. That'll get you in trouble, apparently. Don't you dare use the restroom.
No, that's what we got the other night when we were locked in.
That's right.
Whole hamburgers.
Well, you can have it. I won't be available, but I can have
Oh,
but certainly could have it.
The third?
Let me,
Third is what I was.
the 3rd, you want to try for the 3rd in the morning? I have no problem with that.
I
Yeah,
I
but we were
think it's
locked
easier to
down
do
to
it all in
sleep.
one day, but
Okay.
We
Yeah.
had supper.
You want to do like an 8 a.m.?
Couldn't leave.
Laura, what do you think about them doing an 8 a.m.?
On Monday?
Monday, the 3rd?
third.
Monday the third?
That's good, but I got a port meeting.
Oh,
Or you want to try it anyways?
Yeah, I would say that it, you know, you
Try
can.
for that. How's that? Because obviously you'll be brought up to speed both ways between.
Right, yeah.
I think we should just have Laura talk because she's the only one on both and we're all set.
That's right.
We got it all set.
You want me to aim for the 3rd at 8 a.m.?
yeah. Laura,
It
if we did a
seems-
little earlier or later, would that help with your?
Yeah, I just have a port meeting at 8 o'clock, and it's really, we're going full speed down there, and I don't want to miss anything, so,
Yeah.
whatever.
That's
But you,
important.
they can bring me up to speed on whatever's going
I'll
on.
aim for the 3rd then.
But then if we did it at 9, would you be able to join us? That's what I was thinking, if we could
Well,
do
then
it.
you'd probably lose other people.
You start,
Oh, okay.
yeah, start
Okay.
dropping out of that one. but
I know
I
that
don't need
Senator,
everybody.
I know Jim Powers and Senator Clark cannot come, and myself, because,
day?
on
Well,
that
then-
day, because
then
we
that's
have
Kind of a
a,
tough one.
Well, then
we
we
have
oughta-
a,
Not good.
we
Can we
have
get some
a
reps from,
port
maybe
meeting.
Exeter or something? They could come instead. and
They
there
can
you go.
come for us, they know what's going on.
You want to try for, what?
The 17th is our next city council.
We can do it on the
meeting.
17th. How's that?
Is that always a port meeting?
Will there be a port meeting then?
Let's see, well, we're having one next week because we missed, last week, and they moved it up, so we're gonna, so every 2 weeks, so
It would be the 17th.
it would be the 17th. yeah.
And the seventh Friday isn't good for you.
Not for me, no.
How
But
about
that's no sign you can't have it on a Friday.
7th? You could do the Friday of the 14th.
I can't come in the morning.
Let me ask a more broader question. What does it really take to have it, and no offense to anybody, obviously. How many people do you really need in order, because if we try to get, how many people would it be? 16, 17 people in a room together?
You'd want to have Senator.
I think Senator Clark's
Senator
pretty-
Clark, and I know that she's not available on those days that the port meetings are because she's chairman of the port committee.
Right.
And I'm sure that if, you know, if you wanted to have it on a Tuesday before somebody went in, before we went into
8 a.m. on a
conference.
Tuesday.
On Tuesday would be fine because we just will be going in for Senate meetings and we can be, you know, late if we,
How about the 18th on a Tuesday?
Yes. It's student
Yeah,
government,
that's
something,
student
but
government
could we
day.
do it connection with that?
But that wouldn't be till, one student,
Actually, they
nine
come in.
or
Well,
9:30.
what day do
They come in early, about 9 o'clock, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
What day do we have the
Wouldn't this be good for
meeting?
them to hear?
With kind of the organizational meeting with the.
Sure,
the board?
but sure, I guess. We kind of have it, it's kind of compressed, but sure, you could probably bring them in. They probably wouldn't be here till 9 anyways. You could probably do a 8 a.m.
did he tell you what it was about or?
No, they just wanted, I mean, there's a lot of issues, I guess.
Oh, yeah,
out
we
there.
got issues.
So it'd probably be useful to talk to the legislative delegation. Let me try for the 18th at 8 a.m.
Okay.
How's that? Got a lot of, okay.
Got about 8 dates on that paper now.
Yeah, not anymore.
There you go.
No, I was serious about eating cold hamburgers. We were locked down last Wednesday.
You guys are
We
having trouble
got
getting
down
quorum,
on
right?
the quorum. We
Yeah.
didn't have a quorum, and it took 2/3 vote to pass anything. So the speaker just said to the sergeant at arms, close all doors and sweep the halls and offices for any legislators and bring them in here. And we were there, and if you went out to go to the ladies' room, there was a state trooper standing there to make sure you didn't go out the door, that you came back to the legislative chambers.
Wow.
And they brought, and no offense to Wendy's, but how do you get 350 things together at the last minute? I mean, we were eating cold chicken nuggets and cold hamburgers.
When I was a kid and I
and
worked
things,
at a competing fast food establishment, we called that a level 4. Level 4.
and it was nothing against the people's food. It was just
No.
how you get a call at 6:30, 6:45 at night, get these into the representative hall.
Well, I think we're done. I think that's it. and appreciate it again.
I drove into my driveway at 12:05 on a